Carolina, and I am the host of Sincerely Carolina, a series of educational conversations about current social issues with local and international experts. Make sure you tune in every Saturday on Cool FM from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. Bye! Happy Saturday! Espero que você tenha bom semana, whatever that means to you. Que todo semana produtivo, semana relax. Pessoal nunca participado em caminhata, que todo tiene de hobby dia. Espero que todo leuk para você. Met echt admirabel so commitment e perseverança. So kudos to you if you did that. Feliz weekend, me espero que o weekend começa bom, que está tranquilo, então que você looking forward para o weekend aqui. Me descrevi isso com o episódio de vai estar na inglês, então diz me lo hasi e switch aqui. Reminder também que nossa live riba YouTube e Facebook de Kulefam e de Sincerely Carolina e que vou bahaya o episódio aqui back durante a semana riba Apple Podcasts and Spotify. So that's just, thank you to me awesome sponsors for allowing me to talk about whatever I want to talk about. Thank you to La Roche-Posay, to Gain, and to Total. I appreciate you so much. So I'm doing the switch now. A couple of days ago, I think it was Tuesday, it was World Bee Day, and I think the fact that we have international awareness day for this animal. We have like a couple for different animals, and I don't really know who makes these decisions. But in regards to bees specifically, I think most of us by now sort of understand that bees have a direct impact in everything around us, and I think we know that in some extent in like the abstract way, but we don't really stand still and realize how much impact they truly have, but also how much impact we have on their livelihood and their survival. And so if you follow some news, you might have seen some, very serious news, like in the U.S., for example. We'll talk about that a little bit as well. But yes, bees are a little bit in trouble, and I wanted to talk about the people who see the bees in Aruba, and I wanted to know what's up with Aruba's bees. So without further ado, I will let our guest introduce himself, tell us who he is. So Dan, tell us who you are, why you're here today, what do you do, anything you want to tell us about yourself, and then we'll kind of get into the conversation.
Well, good morning. Thank you for having me here. Buen dia, buen dia. My name is Dan Barros. I've been beekeeping since 2018. Used to be a chef for a while. Decided to do something different, but food related. And I wanted to give myself a challenge, so I thought, why not beekeeping? Didn't know how much of a rabbit hole journey that would be. I've learned a lot, still learning, but my love and my appreciation and my respect for the bees have grown much more. And it's interesting doing your passion, but also trying to make sure that you do it sustainably and be able to pay off bills like Elmar and Webb and all that. Making a living is tricky, but it's been fun, really fun. I would never change it. The way it went in a way that I thought was very interesting for me.
So I think maybe we should start with like the basics and what does a beekeeper do? And I know that maybe some people have seen like the people that wear like the
Suits,
outfits,
spacesuits.
Yes, and they work with bees. But what does it really mean to be a beekeeper? What does your day-to-day look like?
Well, I think there's several different types of beekeepers. So you have commercial. Obviously, they do it to run a business. They could have somewhere between 2,000 to 5,000 beehives, and they go around to different places, and they get paid by the farmers will rent the bees. Then you have the backyard beekeepers who do it for fun. So they do it as a hobby. They want to learn. They want to connect. and share the honey with friends and family and everything like that. And then you have the beekeeper who actually doesn't really work in the field that much, but what they do is they create colonies. They create their own queens and they sell them. So they're not into the honey, they're not into the wax, but they're into selling these packages of bees to people. So there's a lot of different ways you can go with it. As a beekeeper in general, you're basically a steward for the bees. You try to make sure that the colony is happy, you try to understand, you try to connect, but you also are very much responsible for making sure nobody gets hurt and all those kinds of things. There's a lot of responsibility behind that as well.
So what type of beekeeper are you? Like, where do you categorize yourself?
Yeah, that's interesting. So Aruba is small, and you have limited space and limited resources, but it doesn't mean that you can't make a business or do something that's productive. So I consider myself a hybrid. So I'm a little bit of this and a little bit of that. So when I started out, I looked at the prices of shipping down bee boxes from Amazon, let's say, for example, and it was expensive. So I was like, you know what, I'm better off buying a table saw. If it doesn't work out, I can always sell that, but not everybody wants to buy a bee box. So I started making my own bee boxes. So that in itself is already kind of like a carpentry area. And then trying to collect bees is interesting too, because you can have different types of situations. I have a bee vacuum, so you can actually vacuum up the bees. It doesn't hurt the bees, but there's different ways that you can collect the bees, and that's a whole process as well. And then maintaining the hives and understanding what makes them happy is also part of the business as well. So I make sure I put them in places where there's enough fruit trees, there's enough water, and that's not going to hurt anybody. And I limit the size of the hives, so if I feel a hive is getting too big, I can actually take out 2 or 3 frames without the queen being on it. And I have smaller boxes where I put the bees that are on those frames in there. You can create your own colonies as well, because you don't want to create these monsters of beehives, because it can get a little bit dangerous if people accidentally mess with it,
Okay.
So those things you have to worry about as well.
So you call yourself an ethical beekeeper, and we had like a little chit chat before we started. And I mean, first of all, I'm allergic to bees. So like, I mean, and I'm not like severely allergic, but the way I find out is because like, we're with kids and kids like threw a rock at a beehive, and that's usually how a lot of people find out, right, as children. So I had a bunch of bees sting me at once, and I think anyone who would have a bunch of bees stinging them at once would have a reaction. But we were talking a little bit about how bees are different on the island, and I mean Aruba is different, and for those that follow my show, we've had Aruba Conservation Foundation a couple of times. We've have people that work in nature a couple of times. That Aruba just has like a very peculiar geographical situation. So like there is like a switch from being like, okay, I know bees exist in Aruba, and if I have some knowledge about nature that like our bees might be a different type of bee, then you will see in a different country. But then what does it mean to actually keeping them and then deciding to be ethical about it? I mean, I wouldn't know what that looks like. I would think, I mean, do I feed them flowers? Like, But I am interested because the fact that there is a distinction in being like an ethical beekeeper or not means that there are people or there are businesses doing it not ethically. So maybe can you tell us a little bit about what that looks like? Maybe not necessarily on the island, but just like internationally.
In general. Yeah, so I got the idea of ethical beekeeping more from the Greek islands. So they have a lot of small islands, but they also have a lot of beekeepers as part of their tradition. So I learned a lot from them in terms of how they treat the bees and everything. And they sell honey, but they also sell other products as well. So they're very diverse in what they sell. So they're not focused on the honey production or the wax production. They have a very diverse portfolio of products that they make. And I thought that was really cool. But of course, beekeeping is one thing, but making products is another. And so that was a whole other thing that I had to learn as well. And what's great about it is that you start to understand that nature provides only a certain amount of material. So for instance, the bees will produce a certain amount of honey. It's seasonal. So with that, you have to make do with what the bees provide for you. And in my process, I only take out 70% of the honey. I don't take out more than that because I feel like the bees are my partners. So I want to make sure they have something. So it's interesting in trying to be a beekeeper, but also maintain your DNA as a beekeeper, but also make other products that doesn't put pressure on them. That's not the way I want to operate the business. I know there's a lot of people who have, thousands of beehives and stuff like that, and that's great. But at the end of the day, these are living beings, they're entities. And so if we treat them like they're robots, or we treat them like they're just something to be used, eventually they're going to get sick, they're going to have issues, they're not going to be able to do what they're designed to do. I think bees have been have been around for much longer than humans, have been millions and millions of years. So they know what they're doing. But as humans, we like to manipulate and touch and change things a little bit. And so that causes issues in the long run. And in the US right now, there's a lot of issues, I think they had the largest bee die-off in history.
Yep.
So there's something up. And I think the traditional way of beekeeping, where you've had like lots of beehives and you're trying to get production and all that kind of stuff, is going to be phased out. I think eventually people realize that you have to treat them in a way that's different, and show them the respect that they deserve, because they do pollinate 30% of what we eat. And I think those things are going to be interesting, because it's a train of thought that needs to be changed. And as a business, of course, you want to make money, but not in a way that's going to hurt or affect your business partner. That's not the way I think is the most ethical way of beekeeping, in my perspective.
So, you mentioned that you only take like 70% away from your bees. You also mentioned that you don't want to have like huge beehives, but also not have them compete with each other. So respecting their space and how they also like
they're
communicate with each other, because I mean, it's like, I feel like if you put like a bunch together, it almost feels like you're forcing them.
You're stressing them.
Yeah,
they want to survive, they're fighting to survive. But if you have, in nature, I'll give you an example, you're not going to have 20 beehives next to each other. There's a reason why that happens. So for us to
are they territorial, like, from nature?
They're territorial, and but also not just that, but also there's, in Aruba we have limited amounts of trees that fruit. We do have coconut trees, we do have flowers, but they're small. So the amount of honey that the bees can produce is very limited, and that's their food. That's how they survive. So they have the honey, but they also have pollen. And those two things are very important. If one hive doesn't have enough food and another hive is doing great and it's got honey, then what happens? They go to war with each other. And as a beekeeper, you don't want to see that happen, because you don't want to lose a hive, but also you don't want the bees to be stressed. That's not a very nice thing.
And is there like a way for, because I'm thinking, so in a commercial sense, like, can bees be forced to stay somewhere? Like,
no. I mean, you can manipulate certain things, but eventually the bees are going to do what they're going to do. If they want to leave, they leave. If they want to stay, they stay. In general, if they're very loyal to their hive. So for instance, if you have a queen who's laying eggs and there's honey production and there's wax and all that kind of stuff, they don't have a motivation to want to leave. I mean, why start over? I mean, it takes 5 pounds of honey to make 1 pound of wax. So they put a lot of energy into making that wax. So they don't want to leave. But if they're like, hey, you know what, we have no other choice, we got to go, then they'll leave. And, I try to put them in situations where they don't have a reason to leave, but ultimately they can decide. I mean, it's not like I have a door and I can kind of lock them in at 6 o'clock in the afternoon and say, hey, you guys stay here. They do what they want to do, and that's the beautiful thing about them as well.
So, okay. So there is this issue that happened in the U.S. and I know that there are big universities that said that they want to try to help figure out like what's happening. I don't know, for the people that follow U.S. politics, they know that there's also a lot of discussion in regards to that, like how much support is being put into best practices, etc. But a huge thing that they think has been driving, bee extinction or like, depleting beehives has been the commercial use of like pesticides and fertilizers, even things that we use in households.
Or even plants that are genetically modified to have those pesticides in them, or a form of pesticide. That affects the bees as well, because they produce pollen, produce nectar.
So what does that look like here in Aruba? Because I mean, our landscape is very desertous, like that's it, and that means that like you said, the plants that we have that produce flowers and that produce like fruits are very specific. But we see that with more and more like building of houses and buildings, especially commercial buildings, there comes like commercial landscaping that comes with it, which usually does not contain, local plants, but they will bring in things that, look pretty.
Decorative.
Yeah, and that might mean, in a lot of cases, what I have seen is, especially if you bring like a lot of greens that require a lot of water, they will also require a lot of other things to keep them alive. What have you seen in your years as a local beekeeper? What is that doing to our island? Or have you seen like shifts from bees like moving away from certain areas? Like, does it affect them to have like these huge landscape changes?
Yeah, so what's interesting about bees is that they're not picky.
Okay.
So this is a situation, we're going to make it work. That's what I love about them as well. So if you have decorative plants that produce nectar, they're going to go for it.
Okay.
They don't care. They don't discriminate. Oh, you're not a Aruba tree, then I'm not going to go to you. So in a way, if it's a plant or tree that produces nectar, I'm all for it, as long as it's done naturally. Like, you don't give it fertilizer, you don't give it some sort of chemical to help it produce those
because
flowers.
You can have like natural fertilizer.
You can buy stuff that helps them produce flowers and all that. I had beehives in town by the cruise ship terminal, and they did awesome. They didn't need a lot of trees, but I suspect that, as I mentioned before, the bees are not picky, so they probably went to like Coke cans to get sugar or juices that have sugars. Because you do find them in trash cans sometimes. So they're not picky in that sense. The only thing...
Does it do something to them, though? Can it make them, like, sicker or something, or no? Are they, like, super resilient?
Yes and no. I mean, what's interesting is the nectar is what turns into the honey, but the bees will regurgitate that when they bring it to the hive. Okay. But it has a certain percentage of water. So through time, it has to dehydrate a bit. And so what they do, which is really cool, is that they'll go to different cells, and they don't really have a mouth, they have like a straw. So they will sip up some of that nectar and pass it over to another cell. So they're kind of recirculating that nectar, and they're introducing bacteria, yeast, and enzymes to it, so it becomes life. Okay. Now, if you have artificial chemicals and all that, I mean, I'm not sure how that would affect them, but through time, eventually, they're putting their spin on it. And I think that's interesting as well, because we have to be realistic. People are not going to stop drinking juice. No. And people are not going to stop drinking Cokes or other things like that. So the fact that they can use that as a resource, in a way, is kind of a plus. But, where they really get their protein from is the pollen. Okay. And the pollen comes from flowers. I mean, you're not going to have a pollen drink or a pollen coffee or something like that. So they do have to go to flowers to get that. So I would say 50, maybe 40% of their diet can be manipulated through artificial drinks, but for like pollen and stuff, they have to go to a real flower for that. So that's not something that we can manipulate.
And do like non-ethical beekeepers do that? Like, do they feed them like?
There's a lot of different things that they do. Okay. For instance, I'll give you an example. A queen can live up to 2 years, and she can lay up to 1,000 eggs a day. In practice, I don't know if you've seen that. Sometimes the queen will have a colored dot on their back. And that's to tell the beekeeper how old that queen is. Okay. And usually after the first year, they kill the queen and they introduce a new one. To me, I don't find that to be very ethical, but that's how they do it, because they're hoping that queen will be producing eggs all the time. The other thing they do as well is they have trucks that are just filled with sugar water. So they'll go to the different hives and just put in sugar water and feed them that way. Okay. And so if you are... Let's say you're going to living somewhere and all you eat every day is a ham sandwich. You can survive, you'll live, but are you getting the nutrients that you need? Are you getting diversity for your body? Eventually you're going to get sick because you don't have that necessary amount of vitamins in your body to protect against getting the flu or something like that. And that's what's happening with the bees too.
Yeah, and that's what I'm thinking. So there is a difference between like, okay, they'll go for like a Coke can or like, a juice box once in a while versus that being like their 100% diet. Yeah. And I think that it's interesting to see how nature also adapts very well to us, right? Because that's a huge way of them adapting and not just being like, I'm not going to do this. But they do make use of it. But then we do see the impacts of kind of in mass cases. So like we saw in the U.S.
And that's complicated because it's a lot of different factors. I mean, you're talking about people trying to produce more food because there's such a high demand, but we're kind of killing ourselves doing it, you know. So then maybe there needs to be a reset in that as well. It's easier said than done.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not trying to be an advocate for like we got to change and all that, but I try to be realistic, and you have to look at the short term and the long term. I know in Holland they had a lot of issues because the farmers were farming one way, and then the government came in, and now they have to be more sustainable in their farming practices.
Okay.
But if you're growing trees or you have certain crops that may take months to years to be able to produce something, you know, the farmers, they need to eat, they need to you know, pay for things, and so that's a tricky, slippery slope. But you know, the thing about here is that even though for a very long time we've talked about let's do agriculture, let's make it one of our pillars of the economy and all that stuff, it's for whatever reason we haven't gotten as far as we want to. So here we don't really have that issue with so much with you know, having genetically modified seeds, maybe with pesticides, but it hasn't gotten to a point where I feel it could affect the bees. So and that's a good thing in a certain way. But once we get more into it, eventually we have to make sure that when we do start doing farming, it's in ways that, yes, we can do hydroponic, we can do aquaponic, we could do a lot of different things. But if you don't make these areas that have trees and have flowers for the bees in terms of diversity, then we're going to get the same problems we got in the U.S. And I'm not sure that's a solution.
No, definitely not. But you also mentioned demand. So, I mean, if I think of myself as a consumer, I like honey, but I don't like it to the extent where I use it in everything, and like I'm constantly buying honey. Like I'll buy, you know, honey, and it lasts me a while, which also makes that I make conscious choices about the honey that I buy. Then I try to either buy local honey, or, you know, I will read the label because I don't mind paying a little bit more since I'm not using as much of it. But I can imagine that if you are putting honey in everything that you eat every single day, you're going through it much faster. And then you might, you know, start making decisions based on like financials. And yeah.
What's a cheaper version that you can get?
Exactly. And that might mean that you're contributing to maybe like unethical ways of not even honey, because a lot of people end up buying products that aren't really honey.
Yeah. So for the fact of the matter is that there's not enough bees to produce enough honey for everybody. So obviously you're going to get businesses and countries that might be cutting corners a little bit. But I think what's interesting is, like, I'll give you an example. People will buy honey and say, yeah, I use it in my tea, which is great. But are you using it as a sweetener, or are you using it as a medicinal thing? Because if the water's too hot, you're going to kill all the beneficial bacteria, enzymes, and yeast that's in that honey. So how we treat that honey is just as important as well. Because we could buy really good honey, but then how we process it and put it in our body could not be maybe isn't the best way to do it either. And so I think there needs to be more education in that as well. So the resources that we get, we have to try to use it to its maximum benefit, but also buying from local beekeepers or anybody making local products is very important, because it helps with the local economy. Instead of constantly you know, relying on imports and all that, we have to have a bit of a mindset of saying, okay, how can we support these guys that are beekeepers? Because there's a lot of work. I mean, I do it because I enjoy it. I mean, I'm definitely not going to be a millionaire doing it, but I do it because I have a passion for it. But not everybody has that same passion, but they like honey, you know? And those are the things that we have to consider. The value of the honey is much more than just the product, but the process that went behind it, and the processing of it after you purchase it.
Yeah.
So it's easy to go to the store, buy it, okay, I'm going to use it in my cake or my tea or my coffee, whatever. It's great, but you know, if the honey is alive and you're killing it, it's not doing anything for you either.
I remember when I was still living in the U.S. and I had like really bad allergies, and I went to the allergist, and he told me, he's like, you know, you live near like a super nice farmer's market, you need to start buying like local honey. And being exposed to like you know,
and that's
the pollen, and I was like, okay, but
the pollen is all over. It's in the air right now. But I do a bee experience, and it's cool how I have it set up, because I have bees in different locations, and the honey will taste different depending on the location. And so for people, they want to experience the bees, they want to look at the comb and all that, but I think them tasting the honey in the two different spots is very mind-blowing for them, because I never thought, oh, honey can taste different depending on the location. Usually when you buy honey that's in the stores, it's been pasteurized, so it's very flat and sugary, but doesn't have a lot of flavor per se. But when you get honey straight from the hive, it's a whole different kind of experience. So, you know, the visual, but also the tasting is important as well, because that creates an impact for people, because then they have another bar of like, okay, what is, you know, I buy this honey from the store, but I tried this honey from a local beekeeper, and the taste and the flavor was incredible. And
I think you start using it differently too, because like that's the experience that I had. I think before that, I don't know how often I would like use honey in my everyday life, but because I started buying, you know, that was like my first like real experience, and I was like very like medicinal in that sense. Like I had to do it because my allergist told me to do it. And then I tasted different honeys, and I was like, okay, I don't like these, I do like these, and I found like, you know, the farmer I liked, and so the way that I would treat the honey then as well, like I would never use it as a sweetener. I would literally have like a piece of bread with the honey on it, and that's it, because the flavor is so nice that I want, you know, the flavor to be like the whole center of attention.
Exactly.
And I think that you only feel that or understand that once you have flavored like the differences in honey flavor, and not like the sweet use it in your
and besides location, also the age of the honey influences the flavor. So I have one beehive that's kind of like my pet beehive. I've had for about 6 years. It's called Bertha, and Bertha the beehive, and so that has aged honey in it. So I'm kind of, because I do beekeeping and I get honey. I'm a bit of a honey snob in that sense.
By all means.
But with that honey is aged, I know I'm getting super special, vintage, like barrel aged in a way honey, and it's very unique and it's awesome. So, but I mean, I also get people. I had one gentleman recently, maybe about a couple of weeks ago. He has cancer, stage 4, and he's like, honey is the only thing that I feel when I get sick, I feel better. And so he'll buy 8 or 10 bottles. So it's also it's a medicinal thing. It's also a mental, psychological thing as well. So it's a beautiful thing, and I think that's what also it keeps me in the game of beekeeping. That passion of understanding, but also understanding that it means a lot to people in different ways as well, which I think is beautiful.
So if we think about, you know, this conversation and like having these experiences that have made you as a beekeeper, of course, you know, you value bees and you value what they produce, but to like everyday people, like how do we get people to understand that, you know, bees are not there just to produce this thing that we like to consume, but yes, we should enjoy it when we have access to it, but that it's not supposed to be something that we just have like immediate access to all the time, and that we should think about it a little bit more, and you know, I guess sort of changing the idea of it being like this convenience thing and more into being like something to enjoy and to savor and to appreciate the kind of work that goes into it.
So that's education. I think I'm not saying that people are not informed, but I mean, once they understand more about the process and getting that honey, they become much more aware. So I like to go to schools and talk to the children and have them understand it's, yes, you can buy makeup that's supposed to be organic and all that, but you have to read what's in those products as well. It's very important. But also I teach them or tell them my experience, how I get the honey, how I process it and everything like that. And that awareness is very important, because ultimately they can decide what like the distributors are bringing into the island, all that kind of stuff. I think they have a voice in that. So consumer education is very important, but also trying to get more beekeepers is also very important, because I know there's a few beekeepers. I think there's like 7, 8, maybe 10 beekeepers that have their own hustle in terms of like the beekeeping goes, but trying to get more beekeepers is a challenge, because it's not easy. You know, and it takes a certain type of person to do it. So maybe the government could subsidize, give a small amount per month to someone who is beekeeping. Maybe 500 guilders for nothing big. I mean, I'm not talking like 2,000-3,000 guilders, but something that at least they can cover their cost of fuel, their time. Because I mean, you're not going to make tons of money doing this, but it is an important part of our ecosystem. And the more we know about bees, the more we can understand. Okay, what's the best way to create housing projects? What's the best way to make sure that we have space for them as well? And a lot of people, when they see the hive or they see bees, they get scared, like, oh, they're going to attack me. Which is possible, they could. But at the end of the day, they're
realistic
there.
fear.
They're there, and it's a beautiful. I mean, I get people that call me, I have bees in the tree, and I say, well, you're calling me because you want me to take the bees away? Like, yeah, can you move them? Like, was it near your house? Are they bothering you? Whatever? No, not really, but they're there. You're a beekeeper, so you should take them. No, they're supposed to be in nature. If anything, we should have as many bees in nature as possible. And that's one of the things I learned as well is, even though I'm a beekeeper and I have this, I'm supposed to be doing things a certain way, like you have the bee boxes and all that kind of stuff, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't have more bees in nature as opposed to having them in boxes, because that goes back to manipulating them and taking resources from them in an environment that's already very dry, and those things, it's education, just teaching people about it.
So what about if there are people who are like, okay, I landscape my house in a way that I have a bunch of flowers, so I notice that I have a bunch of bees, and maybe I do want to get into it a little bit. Like, what goes into being a backyard beekeeper? Like having one box, or like just trying to.
It's tricky because the way we have our houses set it up is very close to each other. Bees can fly up to 2 kilometers radius. Okay. So if you're in your yard and you have a neighbor, it doesn't mean the bees are like, oh, I'm going to stay here. This is the owners of the house property. I'm not going to go over there. So you're going to have those issues as well. Also, bees do funny things depending on the time of day. Okay. And also if there's issues in the hive. So it can be very shocking to see a big hive swarm or have a bunch of bees coming back home after a day of work. I've
seen that. Yes, very intimidating indeed.
The other thing too is if one bee, let's say you have a pet, and just happens to get stung by a bee, it releases pheromones to the other hive. Say, hey, listen, this is a problem. We got to deal with it. So they'll start attacking that animal as well. So it's very tricky having bees in an urban environment. I had a situation once where I was taking a hive out of someone's house, and I asked the owners of the house to write a letter and tell all her neighbors that I'm going to be doing this on this day at this time. So all the letters got sent out, and she assured me that it happened, and so I started working on the beehive. And one of the owners...
It's like a large beehive?
Yeah, it was a fairly big one. Okay. And there was an owner of a house, but he had an apartment in the back, and the person renting the apartment had dogs in cages because the dogs didn't get along with each other. Okay. So as I'm working, I start hearing these barking and yelping, and then I looked over the fence, and the dogs were getting attacked by the bees. So yeah, it can be a stressful thing because you don't want to see an animal die either. No. So those things are very tricky. That's why it's important. I know there's supposed to be agricultural land, and there's people that have land in their name. But I think what would help is if we say, hey, listen, regardless if you're doing anything with the land, maybe you have it just to put some trailers on it, or have some cars on it, or you just like nature and you're keeping it for your own, personal reasons. By law, if there's a beekeeper who wants to put beehives on your property, no questions asked, he can do it.
Really?
I think they should come with a law like that.
You think?
Yeah,
okay,
I wish there was.
Yeah, okay. I'm like,
no
is there?
No. I wish there was, because at the end of the day, that's land that belongs to the government, belongs to Aruba.
Yeah.
So we have to try to maximize as much as we can from the uses of the land. It means putting beehives in those locations because you have people who are beekeeping. I think that should be something to be considered. Because I have different locations with hives, and I deal with 12 sets of different people. Okay. And most of them are very cool. Most of them, I give them 10% of the honey production. So I get a certain amount and they get a certain amount. So it's my way of paying the rent of the spot. But it sometimes you get people who have very high expectations, and they would like honey a little more consistently, or they feel maybe they didn't get enough honey, or that they didn't get any honey at all. And that causes a little bit of stress for me because there's nothing I can do to change that.
To force them to create.
Do what they do. So if you have a place where there's no set expectations, things happen at your own pace, at your own time, that also makes it a little bit easier, because it's difficult to deal with situations where it creates an uncomfortable environment for you to work in, and it doesn't motivate you to want to do it. And I think those things we have to think about as well.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And so I do want to talk a little bit about the business aspect of it, because I think that we talked a little bit about people when they find out like something new, they get excited and they're like, oh my gosh, this sounds fun and interesting, and then there's like some buzz around it, and then it kind of like when they realize maybe how much work something takes. But you have decided to make this like your whole business, but like you said, there's no like consistency in production necessarily. These are animals and they'll do what they're gonna have to do, but also environmental factors also kind of impact that. I'm assuming rain and stuff like that. What is it like to make that decision to do this like full time and then be like, okay, I'm gonna make a business out of it? And what does that look like, and what challenges do you face?
So I tell people everybody has a journey, right? Okay. Everybody has certain things they want to accomplish in life and certain passions. Maybe they have certain curiosities, maybe they're passionate about something but they're not sure it's really for them. So what I tell people is, in my situation, I was lucky because I had some money saved up, so I could spend a year just kind of like tinkering and trying to learn and everything like that. But eventually it has to start making money because I don't have money forever. So in those situations, you have to be practical and be honest with yourself. How far are you willing to go to make it work? And sometimes you may not have that recipe that works, whether it's whatever business you get in. But to make slow, incremental steps. So for me, I was like, okay, what's my first goal? Then what's my second goal? And what's my third goal? And that's how I did it. Some steps went faster than others. Some took longer. Some of it was more complicated. But in my situation, I was able to find that balance where I wasn't putting pressure on the bees, but I was able to make a living selling other things like soaps and balms that allows me to keep doing beekeeping because I'm not subsidized. So that was a very important part of the business for me because it makes it more of a realistic venture. But yeah, I mean, it's like I said, it's just whatever you're passionate about. Eventually, you're gonna make it work if you keep at it. And it's easier said than done because you have stuff you have to pay and you have certain pressures in life, maybe with kids and other things, house payments or something. But you have to evaluate and say, okay, what is it that I'm interested in doing and what is feasible right now? And maybe you're like, okay, right now I'm not gonna go full into it. I'm gonna have a job and keep this part-time. But in the meantime, I want to research and learn and try to get better at it. And eventually you get to a point where like, okay, well now I have to go into it full-time because it's taking too much time away from my full-time job. And then you make that switch, and it's scary because you don't know what's going to happen. And having a small business on Aruba is tough because the market is so small. There's a lot of different factors. Also, if you have to buy packaging or anything like that, it takes 2 weeks to get here.
At least, yeah.
And then after that, if you sell the product, you have to wait 30 days until the retailer pays you. So you have a lot of this money juggling that you have to do. And it can be very daunting and frustrating because you want to have things happen faster. But it's patience is probably the best thing I could say right now. For me, at least, it's just patience. Take it one step at a time.
So, what is like your biggest market? So, like, are Arubans or local people into bee products? Like, how are we behaving versus like maybe our tourist
it's interesting.
Visitors?
Yeah, it's very interesting because we have two worlds, right? I mean, in the States, you have tourists that go to cities, but it's mostly the local population you're dealing with. Say 80-90% of customers would be locals that live in the area. Here we have a lot of tourists coming to the island, and they have a different kind of mindset in terms of like, I'm on vacation, I don't want to think about anything, I just want to lay out on the beach. But oh wait, I got to bring stuff back home, presents and all that kind of stuff. So that's one part of it. But then you have locals who really support local businesses and doing things more sustainably. So you have that world as well. So you're trying to do marketing in terms of like, how do I get my message across to this group and then this group and this group, and that's a lot. It's hard to keep up with everybody. So what I try to do is keep it simplistic. My packaging, I don't use any plastics or anything like that. And just keep it simple so people can kind of visualize, see and understand and digest it first in terms of like what this is. And then so for me it's equal. I say locals and tourists. I mean, I get called, like I just did an event at the Ritz-Carlton recently, and of course they want me there in terms of like the sustainable local handmade part of it, which is great. I mean, I'm appreciative of it. But I spent a lot of time during the event explaining to people what it is that I do and why I do what I do, you know, and that's also fun in a way, but after like 50 times, you're kind of like tired of talking a little bit. But that's fun. But also when locals buy products from me, they tell their friends or they give it as presents as well. So it's lots of different things. I mean, the way I make my soaps is very traditional. I have to wait a month until I can sell it. It's very handmade, and people appreciate that. And I worked hard at trying to find a price point that people feel comfortable paying. Because you make a product, looks beautiful and everything, packaging is nice and all that, but then it's like $20. Like, ooh, that's a little bit expensive, you know? And I get it, because the person making it maybe doesn't have a lot of volume, but if you want to make it more, I would say mainstream is the word, you have to put it at a price point that you can live with, but also the consumer can live with as well. And that's tricky because you're importing stuff, import duties, shipping, all that kind of stuff. It gets expensive.
Yeah.
And I use a lot of oil.
And things on the island is also expensive,
Yeah.
so it's not like utilities and stuff like that are cheap either.
Yeah, and then what helped me a lot was that Aduana, they basically say anything that's any local ingredient. It can be one thing. If you use that in your product, you get it for import duty free. The packaging.
Nice. Okay.
So that's helped me a lot as well. So if you're making
That's really
something,
nice.
if you're using local fruits, let's say you're making an ice cream or a drink or whatever, if there's something local in it, you can get import duty free for the packaging, which I think
That's
is
really nice.
yeah, it's really cool.
Really encourages, I guess, like.
But sometimes they're kind of like, okay, can you explain this to me again? What exactly you're doing? I'm not sure. I don't understand 100%. You're doing what with the wax? Okay, I don't know. Okay. So then you have to kind of explain to them, meet with them. They see it, they understand it, and then you're good to go.
And then once you're like in the system,
Yeah,
you're
pretty
like
much,
in the
yeah.
system. Okay.
And you have
that's
to work
cool.
with your the shipper as well, because they are the ones that give the invoices to Aduana, and Aduana
Yeah.
says this is what you have to pay and all that kind of stuff. So you have to have a good relationship with your shipper as well, because sometimes they forget, and you get this bill that you have to pay. Whoa, that's a little bit high, you know. And then you appreciate more of that import duty free, but you have to communicate with them exactly
What's happening?
what's coming in, and remind them as well, because they're humans too, so they can
Yeah.
make mistakes.
So do you feel that more locals are valuing like these local made products, and that we are valuing?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah?
They are probably my biggest supporters, like in
Okay.
terms of like, yeah, keep going, you know, keep going, doing what you're doing. We really appreciate it. Whether it's the honey, whether it's the soaps, whether it's the bombs or the bee experience, they're very happy to see me trying. So I get that
Nice.
support. But the cool thing about my business is that I'm a one-man show. So I don't have employees. You know, I do everything on my own. And for whatever reason, one day I decide, hey, you know what? My journey has ended with this. Just turn off the keys and walk away. So,
Okay.
you know, making things complicated for your business, even though you're looking at, okay, how do I make more money? How do I do this? Blah, blah, blah. You know, at some point, we all have to slow down. We get older. You know, our priorities change. And I always also think about that in my business as well. What is my exit plan? You know, if I decide to exit out of the business. So those things you have to think about, because it gets so complicated and daunting that it becomes stressful, and then it's not fun anymore. And for me, having this business is fun. I don't feel like I'm working at all. I feel like I'm on a bit of a vacation with, you know, making products. I can put on some Netflix and just wrap up soaps, and it's fun. It's a lot of fun. But like I said, everybody's different. Everybody has their journey, and everybody sees things in a certain way. So it's different for everybody.
I think that's pretty nice that you share that in that sense as well, because I think that that is also what makes a difference. You know, a lot of people tend to start like hobby projects, and you know, it becomes stressful at some point, of course, especially if you want to like, you know, be completely sustainable for yourself. But that you say that you still find like fun, and that you still find it joyful. But you are aware that if for whatever reason it stops being that you will stop. And I think that that might be something that's stopping people from trying these type of things, because it's like always this idea of like all or nothing. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't be all or nothing, but they also are realistic in like the process, and that it doesn't have to be like super intense all of the time.
No, and it takes time. I mean, was it like the first 2 to 3 years of a business, it goes okay, and then by the time you hit the 4th, 5th, or 6th year, that's when it gets real.
Okay.
Then it's like, okay, this has to be making a certain amount of money to be sustainable. And most businesses fail at that point,
Mm-hmm.
you know. But I mean, in any situation, good or bad, you take something from it. You learn something from it. And I think for me, what I love about what I'm doing, you know, building the bee boxes, learning to work with the bees, making the product. I mean, if you asked me 5 years ago if I'd be making soaps or bombs, I'd be like, yeah, there's no way I'm making soaps or bombs. What are you talking about?
Mm-hmm.
But that's the reality that I found myself in, and I've embraced it. But I've also realized too that, you know, you could have certain types of soaps that you like, but it doesn't mean the consumer likes.
Yeah,
You know, and
of
you
course.
have to also think about that as well. So it can be personal, but then you also have to look at what is the data and the numbers telling me? What's the reality? And you can keep your mindset of like, no, it has to be this way, and this is the way I'm going to do it because I've always done it this way. But like in nature, things evolve, things changes. You know, there's seasons. So in business, it's the same thing too. And you have to be able to be okay with adapting and changing. And ego is such a big thing with people in general. Sometimes, you know, you have to admit defeat and say, hey, you know what? I put everything into it, but I have my family, I have, you know, things I need to pay, and it's just taking too much time and resources from it. And there's nothing wrong with taking 2 steps back in order to make a leap forward. So sometimes you have to back off a little bit, say, okay, I learned this, I did this, okay, this is how I would do it differently. I want to give it another shot. And you would approach it differently. And I think people have to take that into consideration as well. You know, for me, that was important to make sure that the business was fun. I came from an environment that was slightly stressful, and I was like, I'm not going to do that again. You know, I value my time, I value my schedule and what I want to do in life. So having this business that sustains me is a luxury in itself because I can do what I want to do when I want to do it. Obviously, there's a budget. I mean, I can't do, you know, fly into Europe every couple of weeks or something like that. But, you know, within limits, I can live a certain lifestyle, which is also very cool because life is short. I mean, we spend a lot of time from the age of, let's say, 18 to like 65, just basically working or doing something that, you know, most people work for companies.
Yeah.
And by the time you're like, hey, you know what? I actually wanted to do something different. You hit that point where your body's like, you know, you can only do so much. You know, you can do certain things, but you can't do it like, you know, you were 20 or 30 years old.
Yeah.
So that's also important to keep in mind. I get people that do the bee experience and they're accountants or they're lawyers or they're in some sort of corporation or something. And they're like, yeah, I'm thinking about moving to Portugal, or I want to do something different with my life. And I tell them, I said, listen, you have that voice now in your head, but you think it's going to go away. In time, it's not. As you get older and as time passes, it's going to get louder and louder and louder.
And then maybe like even a little resentful then, because then it's going to be felt with regret because you didn't do it when you know were fitter or
you had that opportunity because you didn't have children at that moment or you weren't married. So I think for me, you know, this experience was very much a challenge for myself, but I have a deep appreciation for the whole process, good and bad. And I made a lot of mistakes, but that's part of the journey. And I think in life, you have this opportunity to create a story for yourself. And I'm not a very religious person, but I think things happen for reasons.
Yeah.
So I follow that game plan, and I take it as it comes, you know, but always with the mindset of, okay, what makes me happy? You know, what's best for me? Because at the end of the day, that's the person that you have to live with no matter what. I mean, you could be married, you could be this, you could be that, but you live with yourself every day. And that's what you have to deal with every day. So if you're not happy, you're going to feel it. And that causes mental health issues, that causes depression, that causes a lot of different things. It gets very complicated very quickly. But, you know, I'm a big advocate for doing what you enjoy doing. And the money part, yeah, it's important, but don't make that the reason, because money is not going to make you happy. You might get little, distractions with money, but ultimately, you know, you're living with yourself and you have to deal with those feelings that you have inside, and money's not going to fix that.
I love how like your bee experience, like your bee journey kind of like give you this perspective, because I feel like that's what it should do, right? And like you said, if you sort of just go into like the hamster wheel of life, basically, you might not have these little moments in life where you know, think and truly evaluate like perspective, you know, like what is more valuable, like you said, living a certain lifestyle where maybe you don't get to fly into Europe, like you said, every couple of weeks, but in your balance of life, your everyday life feels good, and it feels like you're doing something that you enjoy and contribute. So I think that's pretty interesting perspective.
Sometimes doing things in life can be scary, but they can be so much bigger than you could ever expect. Like the bees, I was like, okay, bees, put them in a box, honey. That was it. That was the business plan, right?
Yeah.
But it's done so much more than that, more than I expected, and it's caused me to grow in a lot of different ways. But for me, ultimately, I'm a steward. Like, I'm not going to be here forever, and hopefully, we get the next generation that wants to get into it, and also realize the issues that can arise. I'm very much into, like, if you want to learn how to build a bee box, or if you want to get into it in a way, because it took me years to get this experience, but if someone wants to get into it, I'm open to it. I'm like, hey, come help me out, I can show you a few things, but I'm not gonna build the bee boxes for you. I'm not gonna do any of that stuff for you. You have to do it on your own. Get yourself, like, in a situation where you are kind of sustaining yourself. And I think ultimately, at some point, if we don't have enough beekeepers, maybe the government needs to do some sort of subsidy for people that want to do that as well and get that going, because it's very important. I mean, in nature, with the bees we have, to be honest with you, when I collect or I see hives, let's say in trees or near someone's house or something like that, they don't get very big. They're very small. It's when I put them in a box that they expand and they get bigger and all that. So in a way, I'm still manipulating them in that way. But at the end of the day, for me, what's important is that people have that education, but also experience life in a different way. I think we're brain fed a certain way when we're kids. This is how it's working. We go to school. You go to school from, let's say, 7 till 2 or 7 till 1, and then you go home. It's like work, right? If you're working for somebody, you go from 8 until 4 o'clock or 9 until 5, and that's the way you're supposed to do life. But I think with AI and all the stuff that's coming out, it's going to be a complete change in how people live. Because certain professions aren't going to be there, and there's going to be new professions that come out of it. What that is, nobody knows. But I think we have to start training more entrepreneurs on the island. Because we talk about having, we want to have another pillar of the economy, which is right now tourism. But it doesn't mean we can't have other smaller micro economies that help soften the blow. Because when COVID happened, the island just stopped, basically. So if we have these small businesses that can export, that can do certain things that other places cannot do, then that's a value in itself. And you're giving people an opportunity to live and work and not to be dependent on handouts by the government, because at the end of the day, the government there is to help manage resources and manage how we do our infrastructure. But as far as the economy goes, I think people should be able to do what they want to do and be able to make a living from that. I did some research on, like, for instance, exporting to, let's say, the US or something, and there's only 4 or 5 islands that work with Amazon for whatever reason. I don't know why Amazon only works with these islands. So you have, like, Jamaica, Trinidad, even the Cayman Islands, that there's like maybe 80,000 people living there. So it would be great if the government could say, hey, you know what, we're working on PayPal, we're working on how can we do more digital transactions, but why not go to Amazon and say, hey, listen, what do we need to do to get our makers and our builders to be able to export on your platform? Now, it doesn't have to be Amazon, it could be Walmart, or whoever. Whatever. But to get that going, because I know we have an expo desk, and I know we've been working on trying to do exports, but the world is changing, and we have to be able to give more tools to the entrepreneurs to be able to do what it is that they enjoy doing, because we are a very artistic island. We have Carnival, we have a lot of artists, and to get them on the opportunity to be able to export maybe their work or be able to do digital transactions would be great, because then you're creating another type of economy as well.
Dan, thank you so much for that. Is there something about being a beekeeper or just bees in general that you really wish everybody on the island would know and that you want to share right now?
I don't know. It's I think probably when you get local honey, even on the island or anywhere in general, treat it like gold. It's a very special thing. A bee will make 1/4 of a teaspoon of honey in its lifetime. So when you sad to hear. When you have a jar of honey, you can imagine how many bees
worked on that.
And when you look at it, you can imagine probably hundreds, maybe close to 1,000 bees produce that. So the energy and the life form that was there producing that honey is incredible. And I think to have more of appreciation of the product, I know it tastes good, I know all that stuff, but the process behind it took a lot of work. And I think for me that's very important. Obviously also, appreciating bees in general, but when you get that honey, treat it like it's something super special, because it is, especially in this environment, because we don't have a lot of fruit trees and all that's in nature. So the amount of time they put into it is a lot.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
For having this conversation with me on a Saturday morning.
Yeah, that was fun.
I appreciate it. And if anybody just like tuned in towards the end, do not worry. You can rewatch it in a little bit on the YouTube and Facebook of Cool FM and Sincerely Carolina, and you can listen to the audio next week. Once again, Dan, thank you. If people want to find you, where can they find you?
So I have a website, ecolivingaruba.com, and I have a bit of a home store, but just send me an email or a message on the website. It's easier. And then, I can answer any questions.
And if they would want something like a bee box, because I got that as a question.
Yeah.
If people would want a bee box, can they reach out to you if they want the bee box?
So I've decided to limit the amount of beehives I have out there. So I'm actually at this is as far as I'm willing to go with that.
Okay.
I wish I could do more, but I realize in my situation, in my happiness journey in life, I only want to have a certain amount of hives. So I have a waiting list, so I could put them on the waiting list. But for right now, I'm not expanding more with the beehives. I already have a lot going on. So.
Okay, thank you for that. I will let them know.
Cool.
All right, awesome. So I hope you learned something new. Na cominciamento di episode aqui me avisa conosco tava piano na inglês. Desse eu escuta my media episode não tô encontrando mas de conosco piano inglês. I said that at the beginning. I hope you learned something. I learned a lot of interesting things. I do enjoy honey, and I appreciate bees, even though I am very scared of them, but I'm not scared of them like their existence. I like to appreciate them. I think they're so cute. I just don't want them stinging me, so I just stay away, don't do anything that might upset them. But so thank you, Dan, for spending this time and just kind of like explaining it a little bit to us. It was World Bee Day on Tuesday, if you didn't know. I encourage you to, maybe just read up a little bit, look up some stuff, and just kind of understand why bees are so important. But I think what you said then towards the end of like treating honey like gold, if everyone really can change that perspective and sort of like generally appreciate how like so many, little creatures put so much work into that little jar, I think we start seeing things a little bit differently. I will see you again next week. I will be starting with my Pride series next week. I will be talking to a dad about what it is like to be a dad who is also gay, but raising a kid with a mom and just in Aruba's community. So stay tuned for that conversation. I am very excited for that conversation. And I will be doing some series in June and in regards to Pride Month. So do let me know if you have questions about that. Thank you to my awesome sponsors for allowing me to talk about whatever I want to talk about. Today was about bees and beekeeping and bees in Aruba. So thank you to Game, La Roche-Posay, and Total, and of course, Cool FM. I appreciate you so much. I hope you have a nice weekend and that it's a good one, a chill one, or whatever you want it to be one. And let me know if you have any questions or anything that you would like me to talk about in the coming weeks. Bye.